Before we start, I'd like to thank the team at pharmacyshows.co.uk who have sponsored this podcast, enabling us to further our mission to support the well-being of our pharmacy family. Hello and welcome to A Dose of Wellbeing, the Pharmacist Support podcast. As the profession's independent charity, we're delighted to bring you inspiring stories, tips, and expert insights that can help enhance your well-being and make a positive impact in your professional life. This podcast is all about supporting you, our pharmacy family, as you navigate the challenges of the profession. I'm Melissa Cochrane, Wellbeing Development Senior Manager at Pharmacist Support, and today I'm joined by Danielle Hunt, our Chief Executive, and in this episode we're going to be discussing women's health. This is a topic we're both passionate about, as finding ways to support women's health in the workplace can be a key contributor to women staying in work, achieving and earning more, and having greater career fulfillment. Danielle, thank you for being here with me today to talk about this important topic.
No problem.
So, I know women's health is something you really care about, and I wonder where that interest comes from.
Yeah, so I think my interest in women's health comes from two places, really. The first is, I think throughout my career, I've line managed quite a lot of women. And obviously, some of those have experienced women's health issues. And I think through doing that, I've seen how that can really impact an individual in terms of, you know, how they feel at work, their mental health. And I think it's given me a real insight into how employers can support women at work who are dealing with those issues. And then secondly, I suffer from women's health conditions myself. I've got endometriosis and adenomyosis. And I think that's given me a much deeper appreciation of how complex women's health issues can be. They're often misunderstood. People don't really know about them. I didn't know a lot about them until I was diagnosed. So I think that's just made me more aware and probably more determined to be an advocate for women's health.
Yeah, that's really great. And from your experience, how can workplaces support individuals who are suffering with women's health issues, maybe similar to yours?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is to create a culture where women feel able to be open and talk about these issues. I think it's important to normalise the conversations so people feel safe to open up without that embarrassment, because it is quite hard. Women's health issues to talk about can feel quite difficult, and I know that from personal experience. It's a very personal thing, and I think for me, opening up and talking about my condition, I didn't want it to seem like a sign of weakness, which is probably the wrong mindset to have, and I wouldn't think that about a colleague. But I think yourself, because it's so personal and you're dealing with that yourself and understanding the condition, you're worried about what other people might perceive you as, and, you know, oh, is she not going to be able to be up to the job, you know, or what does this mean? So I think being more open about it will be really helpful. And there's probably an awful lot of people we don't know are suffering with these things because they're not open. And I think if we were able to talk about it a little bit more, everyone could be a bit more supported. And I think it's important to create that safe space so people can tell you what they need. Because I think with the physical symptoms, you know, you can kind of deal with that and there are practical things you can do, but there's often a mental health impact. You know, I've felt that a lot. You know, if you're dealing with significant pain and you're going through the ups and downs and there's hormones involved, it does have a significant impact on your mental health. Dealing with that pain and particularly fatigue for me really takes its toll, and really being mindful for me of like, what have I got coming up both at work and personally, and being mindful of the condition because I have to be quite careful. So I think workplaces can play a huge role in supporting people with conditions like mine and other women's health issues. I think flexibility is a really key thing. You know, practical measures could be offering flexible hours, remote working when the pain, fatigue is severe. If it's not possible to work from home, I think it's really important to allow adequate breaks, because it's about kind of that restful period. Having a quiet rest space for someone to go would be really good. Obviously, allowing that time and flexibility around medical appointments as well. I think particularly when I was first diagnosed, it felt like I had an awful lot of medical appointments. I was thinking about, how am I going to manage all of this? But I was really supported, and I thought that was really helpful. And also, employers can think about maybe adjusting workloads or deadlines at a time of a flare-up. A flare-up can be really, really hard to deal with, and it can be, you can't really get on with things in the same way. So just adjusting things a little bit can be really helpful. And obviously offering any additional support. So as an employer, a lot of people have access to wellbeing services, so making colleagues aware of that and kind of acknowledging the impact, wider than the physical symptoms, but the mental health kind of impact. And some employers choose to kind of document some of this and formalise it. I think it depends on kind of the culture of your organisation. I think if you're open and honest, you might not feel the need to have set policies, but I think it's important to talk about it and say we can do things to help you if you're suffering from any condition or anything going on at home.
Yeah.
And for me, I think my experience has been, women's health issues occur throughout a woman's life, and I think through managing different women, you can see, the impact at different life stages. And I'm interested in kind of your thoughts on that, Melissa, and if you feel there's a lack of awareness of kind of what people go through, what one goes through throughout their life, and what your experience of this is.
Well, I think that's a really good question. And yes, there are definitely kind of ages and stages to women's health. But I think that part of what can make the workplace a bit more difficult for women who are having a hard time is that there can be a lack of awareness in men, which is totally understandable because, they're not having to deal with it in their own bodies, at least. I mean, they might be in their lives in other ways, but there can be a lack of awareness and understanding. And at worst, this can lead to a feeling of, this person can't cope. And maybe concerns about whether or not this person should be promoted. And unfortunately, I know you expressed you had some worries about that, and that wasn't unfounded because there's some research carried out by Wellbeing of Women. They did a survey which they called Just a Period. So about a third of men surveyed agree that they would be hesitant to promote someone who frequently took time off for period-related symptoms. And a third of men said that it's not reasonable to take time off for that reason.
Wow.
Almost a quarter said they felt it's not reasonable to take time off or to work from home because of heavy bleeding. And more men thought it was reasonable to take time off work for toothache, musculoskeletal problems like back pain, cold and flu, and migraine than for period pain.
Yeah, and I think that's partly the issue with any women's health issue. I think, and I don't understand why, but the empathy around it is less. If someone had the flu, you wouldn't dream of asking them to come into work and just get on with things.
Yeah.
But the fact when it it's women's health related, people think that's okay, shows that was clearly a problem.
Yeah, and I want to also interject, it's not always just men. I mean, there are plenty of women, especially if they've never had a problem, who might be like, well, come on.
Just get on with it.
Get on with it.
I've heard that.
Or women who have had a problem, but maybe they haven't had support, and they're like, well, I had to do it. Yeah. So, I do want to put it out there. It's not always men. There can be a problem with women as well. But I do agree that the empathy can be less in this arena. So I think there is a lot of work to be done to come around that. So if we go back to ages and stages, we've got, if we look at younger women, there can be more of for some women, an impacted periods. But then as life progresses, things change. So we'll start with that. There are small changes that workplaces can make to better support employees experiencing severe pain or bleeding. So there can be flexible scheduling, which you've talked about, flexible working depending on location, access to rest areas, free period products, conversations and training for managers. I think that's really, really key, because whoever the woman has to talk to about it, you would hope that they can receive it in a supportive way. So training for managers and leaders can be really important. And then robust sickness policies and flexible working allowances can help places of work to provide what women need without necessarily having to have specific menstrual policies. Now, there are companies who do have menstrual policies, and there are countries actually where it's mandated that all places of work have these policies. There are positives and negatives to that. And I think a positive is it gets everybody talking about it and thinking about it. A negative might be sort of the, I guess, stigma around actually using it and whether or not it can affect career progression. People might be very hesitant to come forward and say that's why they need time off. They might be more comfortable kind of saying, I've not been very well, and taking sick leave and then dealing with it that way. So I think there are different ways that places of work can deal with it.
Yeah, I agree. And also, a woman might be dealing with that and kind of accepting what she's going through and not want to talk about it. So it shouldn't be that they have to revoke a certain policy and say, oh, I don't want to use that policy. They should be able to say, I'm feeling really unwell. And I think we give them space to then talk when they're ready. And I really love the idea of training for managers, because from the other side of things, it can be quite difficult. I can imagine if you're a man and, you've got a woman colleague come to you and talk to you, you might not know how to handle that conversation, what to say. You don't want to upset somebody. So I think that would be really beneficial. And for me, rather than set policies, I think if we open up that culture where you can talk about it and then, see what somebody needs, because it's not maybe going to be a set number of days off. It might be a slight adjustment to work pattern. It might be working from home at certain periods. But yeah, I think that flexibility is really important.
Yeah, and that piece about line management, I think, is really important. It might be that a good thing a place of work can do is say, you don't have to talk to your direct line manager about it. You can talk to anyone from who's in a leadership position and about anything. Like, could be mental health, could be, all kinds of things that people might not feel totally comfortable with their line manager, but there might be a different member of the leadership team that they think, I feel like I could talk to that person. So it could be that that's another adjustment. Place of work says, if you're having an issue, of course you can talk to your line manager, but you can also talk to somebody else. And then putting training into place so that people don't get defensive or upset if that happens, but just to understand that that's another part of the workplace being a supportive place to be, giving people that flexibility about who they feel they can talk to.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And I think doing that allows, you might have a more meaningful conversation, particularly if that person you've chosen to talk to have been open about maybe issues they've been through. So you feel like you're more able to connect and you're more able to open up. So I think that's really positive. And we do that on other issues. If someone's maybe recently moved house and you're moving house, you would go to that person and say, oh, I'm having problems. Can you give me advice? So it's not unusual to go to somebody you feel might be able to connect with the subject.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And that brings about the question of leadership being kind of open about their own experiences, because that does allow other people to think, oh my gosh, well, if our chief exec has been through endometriosis and has managed to get through it, I can talk to her and she'll be able to give me some really good advice. Whereas if we kind of close the book on that and say, I wouldn't want anybody to ever know that I've been through that, we're not just closing ourselves off, but we're closing off a road for other people to go down.
Very
so
true.
Keeping that in mind, I think, can be really helpful. So that's great. So if we go back to like the ages and stages, right? So there are other gynecological issues that can come out when you're sort of in the reproductive stages of your life. So you talked about endometriosis, that's a big one. And I just wonder, were there times when you needed to discuss this with someone at work in order to seek support. And how did that go for you? Or did you kind of hold yourself back from doing that? What was your experience?
I think at first I probably did hold myself back, and I think that was around understanding the condition myself and understanding what needs I needed. But there was one particular example where I had a huge flare-up when I was in my office at work, and we were due to have a senior management meeting in the afternoon. And my colleague knew something wasn't the matter. She was relatively new and maybe I hadn't talked about the condition. And I did pull her to one side and say, I'm really, really suffering. And actually, rather than just carry through the pain and probably not be very productive in the meeting, I asked her to chair the meeting instead, gave her a brief and said I would, input later in the day, but I needed to go home. So I think sometimes just being brave enough to do that rather than power through and not really be very present, and people thinking maybe something else is going on, being open and honest is probably quite useful. It's hard because, I never want to feel like I'm letting anybody down or I can't do my job efficiently or properly. So it is really hard to do that. But that was the best thing, because if you're in the middle of a flare-up like that, the best thing you can do is rest, because your body recovers quicker from the flare-up and then you can come back to work much better and much, more efficient. Whereas if you just drag it out and keep trying to keep going, it lasts an awful lot longer. And I think I've learned that through experience. But I think as you've kind of been dealing with the symptoms over years, you get braver in understanding what you need and kind of managing things around that.
Yeah, that's great. That's really helpful to know. Especially because a lot of reproductive health conditions are invisible, but they can be really debilitating. So it's really important that we have conversations about this and that women feel that their places of work are going to be supportive. Yeah. Another area when we're looking at ages and stages is for people going through fertility issues. So we're, talking about IVF, for example. It can be emotionally and physically exhausting going through fertility treatments and trying to conceive. That up and down every month can be really tough. So we actually have a really great case study of someone going through IVF on our website. So I would encourage people to have a look at this. It also outlines the kind of workplace support that was so important to this individual. So many of the things that helped her are things we've been talking about. So having a supportive line manager, being able to manage her diary so she could attend appointments. There are a lot of appointments involved in IVF. So that flexibility, while it's definitely easier in some organizations than others, it might be kind of tricky in community pharmacy, I get that. But as much as you can be flexible with employees around these things, it really makes a massive difference when they're going through IVF, for example. And then, of course, pregnancy and childbirth is another big area. Miscarriage and pregnancy loss can be devastating. So making sure you have policies in place that can support people as they're going through that time, that's really important. And then as we're getting to the end of that phase of life, there's the menopausal phase. Now, we know that perimenopausal symptoms can start 10 years before a woman reaches menopause. She might not know that a lot of her symptoms are coming even from perimenopause, because people go through it at different ages of their lives. So there's no hard and fast. So offering flexibility in terms of working temperature can be really helpful. Allowing fans, or even just casually placing fans around and saying, if you need one at your desk, go ahead and take it, making it kind of normal. Flexibility in working place, hours, and finding ways to reduce stress can be very helpful at that stage.
And I love that the conversation on menopause has really grown over probably the last 5 to 10 years that we're now talking about it. I think people feel more comfortable to talk to colleagues. And I know at the charity, we've got our own menopause group for people to discuss. How do you think we can equip line managers to recognise menopause symptoms and support employees without overstepping? Because I think it's really important you don't overstep, but there needs to be an awareness. So what do you think?
I think you don't have to label anything. So in terms of maybe what would feel like overstepping both to the person doing it and the person receiving it, if they go, have you maybe considered that you're going through menopause? Like that could be really an awkward conversation. So just saying, you know, it seems like maybe we could support you by bringing in some flexibility, by, you know, you're looking at these other things we've talked about.
Yeah.
Temperature, flexibility, understanding that the impacts of menopause are not just physical. They can be emotional, to do with kind of reaching the end of your reproductive years. That can mean a lot of different things to different women. For some women, it might be really freeing, like, thank God I'm done with that part of my life. For other women, it can be really devastating. It's starting to look at your own mortality. So the psychological can be a big part. And then there's also the impact of wildly changing hormones, and that can lead to feelings of anxiety, depression, panic attacks. Like, there can be all kinds of stuff that goes along with that. So being really supportive, making sure that you have a good employee assistance program, that employees have access to counseling. Here at the charity, we have counseling and peer support available, so people are welcome to contact us. But I think those are some ways that workplaces can help without kind of turning it into something really uncomfortable.
And again, I know I've said this a few times, but keeping that conversation open, because I know from colleagues that I've worked with who's been going through a menopause, a big thing is brain fog as well. And the huge knock in confidence, because you're dealing with quite a lot, and then suddenly your brain's not maybe working in the same way it did. You sat in a meeting and you've gone completely blank. And I've had colleagues who, because we're very open, have gone, I'm really sorry, I've got brain fog. Can we just go back a step? That's really good. But if you've not got that culture where people can say that, and you just feel like, I don't know what's going, you know, I forgot my train of thought. What are people going to think? We're going to think I'm not on it. But, you know, there's all that to deal with as well, which I think is really important to acknowledge that, you know, you're going through a lot as a woman, and also then you're almost a little bit paranoid about what people are thinking, because you might not feel as on it. You might not have slept particularly well or something, and you're not having a great day. And you don't want people going, well, what's going on? Like, why is this person suddenly, you know, forgetting things in meetings and seems absolutely exhausted? So I think being open helps the individual as well feel like, you know, people will understand. And most people, I think, will understand and be supportive. And I think what's really sad is that research shows that a significant number of women consider reducing hours or leaving work altogether because of menopause symptoms and other women's health issues as well. Why is this happening? Why do you think this is happening? And how can employees prevent this loss of talent?
Well, I think a lot of it is about what you've identified, which is loss of confidence. That can be a huge one. And the really... what I think is really sad about this is that it's happening at a time when you should be at the pinnacle of your career. So you've worked for probably 30 years in your field. You should be at the point where you have reached the top of your game. You have a lot to give. You still have energy. You're not ready to retire yet. You've got so much knowledge, experience, and energy, and a lot to give, that if we can help women to get through this point, they have so much to offer and give. So I think we need to think about this. But I think reducing stress can have a big impact where you can. So looking at that at work, flexibility, acknowledging and understanding what's going on, and getting the right kinds of support. We have done a podcast with Anthony Singh, who runs the some pharmacist-led menopause clinics, and he talks about the types of support women can have in terms of HRT and things like that. So being aware of what's out there and getting the right help is really important. Not a lot of GPs are specifically trained in menopause, unfortunately. So maybe not stopping if you haven't got the right treatment after seeing one person, but continuing to look for help. All of these things can be really helpful. And, you know, with you in your position as chief executive and taking leadership of an organization, what do you think about how we can shift from a culture of, just get on with it, to one of empathy, flexibility, and support in order to help women at all of these different ages and stages of life?
Well, I think women's health issues need to be taken more seriously, and we've discussed that. And we need to raise awareness of all the common conditions. A lot of these conditions are really quite common, but we just don't talk about them. And I think that's by recognising the many conditions and the impacts they can have. Endometriosis we've talked about, PMDD, we've got perimenopause, we've got pregnancy loss. There's so many things that women often go through quietly, don't talk about, often feels quite invisible, but it's deeply impactful for that individual as well. Yeah. And until we start talking about it and taking it more seriously, I think it won't help in the workplace. And that's a key thing we need to do. And you've mentioned it as well, that leaders play a crucial role in kind of modelling the compassion and prioritising outcome over just presenteeism. I take it from personal experience. I worked really hard, and just because I had to maybe take a few hours off one afternoon and couldn't attend a meeting doesn't mean I'm not good at my job and impactful. Just being present all the time isn't necessarily how we should be measuring people's success. And I think the right culture plays a big role in that, recognising that, creating that safe space. And I do think, we are moving in the right direction. I think these topics are being talked about more widely just in society. And I think if we build that into our workplace culture, we've talked a lot about the impact of workplace culture on mental health. That just extends to all health. It's about open conversation. And then we can create a workplace where, things like women's health issues are acknowledged. You don't necessarily need to talk in detail, but they're acknowledged, they're respected, and they're not just pushed aside as, that's an inconvenience. I think that's really important.
Yeah. Totally agree.
And, we've talked about kind of how colleagues can support. What role do you feel male colleagues and leaders play in building an environment where women's health is respected and understood? And what prevents men from engaging in these conversations, really? How could we remove those barriers?
Yeah. Well, I think it benefits everyone to have an understanding of these issues. So that includes men. We can see from the survey results I was talking about earlier that there is a need for this kind of understanding. So I think training and workplace culture are really key. I would hope that as medical professionals, perhaps in pharmacy, there's more of an understanding, but I do think that there's still work to be done about reducing stigma. So I was talking to a male colleague about this, and his perspective was that male colleagues and leaders play an important role by actively learning about women's health issues and creating an environment where these topics can be talked about. One barrier he felt is that traditionally men just don't feel comfortable talking about women's health, quite as simple as that. And that can lead to a cycle where the woman might feel hesitant to raise these issues. And then over time, there's a lack of dialogue and there's more stigma. So I guess encouraging and opening conversations, talking about it and thinking about it, perhaps in the same way we do mental health, neurodiversity, sexuality, race and ethnicity, and other EDI topics. So maybe bringing it into those discussions, and making it a regular part of training and awareness like we do those other issues. I think that can be hugely helpful. I also think there's some crossover into challenges when it comes to understanding men's health, and that's something we'll be touching on in a future podcast. So again, it's not all about women. There are men's health issues too. So it's kind of about increasing understanding across the board.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Well, I think we've probably come to a good point where we can wrap up the conversation, but I think it's been a really important conversation, and I want to thank you for sharing your insight and your own experiences. I I do think that hearing other stories is probably the most impactful thing that can come of discussions like this. So thank you very much.
No problem.
We always hope our listeners are feeling inspired to bring about positive changes in their own life. If today's podcast has resonated with you, you'll find further well-being information, videos, and online content on our website and our Wellbeing Learning platform, which is available to pharmacists, pharmacy students, and trainees for free. For further information on our support services, please click on the How We Can Help link in the podcast description, and we'll also be posting links to a lot of the information that we talked about in today's podcast. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you feel you may need support. We want to continue providing our free and confidential support services and to open up conversations like this to ensure that no one in our pharmacy family faces challenging times alone. As an independent charity, we rely on donations from individuals and organizations across the profession to enable us to do this. So if you're in a position, please consider making a donation today. You can find a QR code in the show's description or at the end of the video. Donations help us to provide our essential services, including our counseling and peer support, financial assistance, and more. Thank you so much for listening, and we look forward to seeing you again in our next podcast.